The stars shimmered coldly over the peaceful colony of New Eden. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting pale silver light over the sprawling cityscape. Families were settling in for the night. Children laughed as they played beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. The hum of automated traffic filled the air, blending with the faint buzz of energy shields protecting the colony's perimeter. It was quiet, too quiet. Colonel Marcus Bonner stood on the balcony of the colony's command center, looking out at the city below. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with deep scars running across his left cheek, a reminder of the last war humans fought against the Vashtar Empire. His military uniform was crisp, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. Something felt wrong. The air was too still. His instincts, honed through decades of combat, screamed that trouble was coming. "Colonel," a young officer called from the command deck behind him, "we're detecting unusual gravitational distortions just outside the colony's orbital perimeter." Bonner turned sharply. "How many ships?" "Unknown, sir, but it's large." Bonner's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped into the command room. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing the colony's orbital defenses. A ripple of dark shapes appeared on the outer edges of the grid, a distortion pattern caused by cloaked vessels. Bonner's throat tightened. Only one species in the galaxy had technology like that. "Vashtar," he whispered. An alarm blared across the colony. The calm of the night shattered as bright red lights flashed through the streets. Automated defense drones activated, rising from hidden platforms along the perimeter walls. Civilians froze in place, fear spreading like wildfire. "Sir," the officer shouted, "we're getting an incoming transmission from the lid ship." "Put it through." A flickering image appeared above the command table. A Vashtar warlord's face, reptilian, with dark obsidian scales and slit pupilled eyes, glared down at them. The alien's mouth curled into a predatory grin. "Humans of New Eden," the warlord hissed, his voice deep and sharp. "Your existence is an insult to the order of the galaxy. You have violated the terms of your existence. You will be corrected." "Cut the transmission," Bonner barked. Outside, the dark shapes began to materialize as the cloaking fields faded. Dozens of massive warships, larger than any human vessel, hovered above the colony like monstrous predators. The colony's orbital defense platforms opened fire, releasing bright streaks of plasma into the night sky. The Vashtar ships remained still for a moment, then retaliated. Bright beams of crimson energy lanced downward, cutting through the defense platforms like paper. Explosions lit up the sky. Pieces of burning metal rained down over the city. Bonner clenched his fists. "Sir, shields are down to 40%. The officer shouted. "Divert power from the lower grids," Bonner shouted back. Massive explosions erupted in the distance as the first Vashtar bombardments hit the colony's surface. Entire buildings disintegrated beneath the onslaught. Civilians screamed as fire engulfed the streets. Emergency drones tried to contain the chaos, but the sheer scale of destruction was overwhelming. "Get the civilians to the bunkers," Bonner ordered. The ground trembled beneath his feet. He stumbled forward as a nearby impact sent shockwaves through the structure. The sound of twisting metal and collapsing stone filled the air. He could see people running in the streets, mothers clutching their children, fathers shielding their families. A young woman tripped and fell as debris crashed down around her. Bonner vaulted over the railing, landing hard on the street below. He ran toward her, grabbing her arm, just as a chunk of metal slammed into the ground where she'd fallen. He pulled her to her feet and pushed her toward the nearest shelter. "Go," he shouted. "Get inside." The Vashtar ships began deploying ground troops. Dark figures in black armor dropped from the sky, landing with heavy metallic thuds. Plasma fire erupted through the streets as human security forces engaged them. The aliens were taller, stronger, and faster. Their dark armor shimmered with advanced energy shields. Human bullets and plasma rounds barely made a dent. Bonner drew his sidearm, and fired 3 shots at a nearby Vashtar soldier. The first 2 shots bounced off the alien's shields, but the third found a gap beneath the chin. The alien collapsed with a gurgling hiss. Bonner took cover behind a destroyed vehicle, breathing hard. "Colonel," a voice crackled through his comm. It was Lieutenant Harris, one of his senior officers. "They're cutting through the perimeter. We need reinforcements." "There are no reinforcements," Bonner shouted back. He glanced toward the sky. The colony's defense fleet was already in pieces, burning in orbit. Wreckage fell like dying stars through the atmosphere. The Vashtar warlord's image appeared again on the shattered remnants of a public screen. "You will not survive," the alien growled. "This is not war. This is extermination." Bonner gritted his teeth. He opened his comm channel to Earth. Static buzzed through his earpiece before he heard the cold, calm voice of command. "This is Earth Command. Status report. This is Colonel Bonner. New Eden is under heavy attack. We've lost most of our defenses. Civilian casualties are catastrophic. Request immediate backup." Silence. Then, "Message received." Bonner's hand tightened around his weapon. "That's it. You're not sending help." There was a pause. "Stand by, Colonel. Help is coming." The channel went dead. Bonner's jaw clenched. He fired at another Vashtar soldier, taking it down. His heart pounded painfully in his chest as he crouched behind cover. Explosions lit up the night. The colony was burning. His people were dying, and Earth had just told him to. "Stand by." Another explosion. The blast knocked Bonner off his feet. His vision blurred as he hit the ground hard. Through the smoke and flames, he saw the young woman he'd saved earlier crouched beneath a broken piece of wall, clutching a crying child. A Vashtar soldier approached them, raising its weapon. Bonner pushed himself up, his body screaming in pain. His pistol was gone. His head was spinning. The soldier raised its weapon. Bonner screamed. A bright flash of light. The Vashtar soldier collapsed, a smoking hole in its chest. A dark shape landed behind Bonner. Black armor, glowing red visor, human military insignia. A second figure appeared beside the first, then another. Bonner's breath hitched. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. A cold, metallic voice echoed through his comm. "This is Earth's response." The figures raised their rifles and opened fire. Precise shots, deadly accuracy. The Vashtar soldiers fell instantly. Bonner struggled to sit up as a tall figure approached him. Sleek black armor, a red visor, and the mark of Earth's special forces. The soldier knelt down. "Colonel Bonner," the soldier said. Bonner nodded. "Earth heard you," the soldier said. "Now it's time to fight back." Bonner grinned through the blood dripping down his chin. "About damn time." Bonner struggled to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. His ears were still ringing from the last explosion, and his vision was blurry. The dark armored figure standing in front of him was human, no doubt about it, but not like any human soldier he'd ever seen. The sleek black armor was reinforced with glowing red veins of energy pulsing beneath the surface. The red visor covering the soldier's face glowed menacingly as the figure turned its head toward the burning cityscape. Who are you?" Bonner managed to ask. The soldier's head tilted slightly. "Special Operations Unit, Omega Division." Bonner's eyes widened. The Omega Division was a rumor, a whispered story told among soldiers about Earth's most classified Black Ops team. They were said to be more machine than human, modified with cutting-edge cybernetics and enhanced reflexes. Bonner had always thought it was just a myth. Until now. The soldier offered Bonner a hand. Bonner hesitated for a moment before gripping the armored hand and pulling himself up. The strength behind the soldier's grip was unreal. Bonner staggered slightly as his balance returned. "Colonel," the soldier said, his voice cold and metallic. "Your orders." "My orders." Bonner's head was still spinning. He glanced toward the smoking horizon. "We're being overrun. We need to get the civilians out before." "Negative." The soldier interrupted. Evacuation is impossible. The Vashtar have established a containment field around the colony. No one leaves. Bonner's fists clenched. Then what the hell are you doing here? To fight. Behind the soldier, more black-armored figures descended from the sky. They moved with unnerving precision, landing with soft metallic thuds. Each one carried advanced rifles that shimmered with plasma energy. Their visors glowed a dark crimson. Bonner counted at least 30 of them. They've taken out our defenses, Bonner said. We don't have the firepower to break through. You do now, the soldier replied. Without warning, the soldier raised his rifle and fired. A streak of blue plasma shot past Bonner's head and struck a Vashtar soldier creeping through the smoke. The alien exploded in a burst of green fluid and bone. Bonner turned to see more Vashtar emerging from the wreckage, weapons raised. The Omega soldiers didn't hesitate. They moved like ghosts, fast and precise. Plasma fire filled the air as the black-armored figures tore through the advancing aliens with lethal efficiency. The Vashtar fired back, but the Omega soldiers' reflexes were unnaturally fast. They dodged incoming blasts, returning fire with brutal accuracy. Bonner grabbed a discarded rifle from the ground and joined the fight. He dropped 2 Vashtar, with quick bursts of plasma fire. A third charged toward him, swinging a heavy energy blade. Bonner ducked and fired upward, blowing a hole through the alien's chest. The creature collapsed at his feet. "Colonel," a voice shouted through the smoke. Lieutenant Harris stumbled toward him, blood running down the side of his face. "We've secured the eastern bunker. We're moving the civilians." An explosion rocked the ground beneath them. A nearby building collapsed in a cascade of fire and debris. Bonner shielded his face as chunks of metal and stone flew through the air. A massive Vashtar dropship descended through the smoke, its hull bristling with weapon emplacements. The ship's side panels opened, and a dozen heavily armored Vashtar warriors leaped from the craft, landing with ground-shaking impact. Their armor was thicker, reinforced with shimmering energy shields. They carried long, serrated plasma blades. The Omega soldier in front of Bonner turned toward the new threat. "Heavy units," the soldier said. His voice remained emotionless. "Engaging." The Omega soldiers raised their rifles. Bright blue beams of plasma streaked through the smoke. The Vashtar warriors advanced, deflecting the shots with their plasma blades. One of them lunged at an Omega soldier, cutting through the air with unnatural speed. The Omega soldier sidestepped the attack, grabbed the alien's arm, and twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the street. The alien roared and swung its blade. The Omega soldier ducked and drove a glowing knife beneath the creature's chin. The alien's head snapped back before it collapsed. Bonner fired at the nearest Vashtar. His shots bounced off the alien's shields. The creature charged toward him, blade raised high. A blur of black armor moved between them. The Omega soldier intercepted the attack, raising his arm. A red energy shield flickered into existence, blocking the alien's strike. The soldier's other hand shot forward, plunging a glowing blade into the alien's chest. The creature spasmed and fell to the ground. "Bonner," Harris shouted. "We've got civilians trapped in the western quadrant. We need to get them out." Bonner turned toward the Omega soldier. "Can you open a path?" "Affirmative." The Omega soldier signaled to his squad. The black-armored figures advanced toward the western quadrant, cutting down any Vashtar in their path. Bonner and Harris followed close behind, firing at anything that moved. They reached a crumbling building where a group of civilians, women, children, and elderly, huddled beneath a broken section of wall. A young boy was crying, his mother clutching him tightly. Bonner stepped toward them. "We're getting you out of here." "The field," the mother whispered. "We can't get out." Bonner's jaw clenched. "We'll find a way." The Omega soldier stepped past him and raised his hand toward the sky. His palm glowed red as a circular grid of energy formed in the air. A ripple spread through the atmosphere. Suddenly, the containment field shimmered, then fractured. "It's destabilized." Harris shouted. How? Bonner asked. The Omega soldier lowered his hand. Classified. Bonner grinned despite himself. I'll take it. More Vashtar were approaching from the east. Bonner raised his rifle. Get the civilians moving. Now. Harris and the Omega soldiers guided the civilians through the broken field. Bonner stayed behind, covering their retreat. He fired at the advancing Vashtar, taking down 2 more. A massive alien charged toward him, its plasma blade raised. Bonner's rifle clicked empty. The Omega soldier appeared in front of him, raising his hand. A pulse of red energy shot from his palm, disintegrating the alien instantly. Bonner exhaled shakily. That's useful. Colonel Bonner. The Omega soldier's visor flickered as he turned toward him. Command has new orders. Bonner narrowed his eyes. What orders? The Vashtar fleet is amassing for a final assault. Bonner's stomach twisted. How long do we have? Minutes. Bonner's hand tightened on his rifle. Then we better get ready. The Omega soldier's visor pulsed crimson. We are ready. Bonner turned toward the burning city. The civilians were being escorted through the broken field. The Vashtar were regrouping in the distance, dark shapes slithering through the smoke. Bonner's pulse quickened. He looked at the Omega soldier standing beside him. What's your name, soldier? The figure's visor flickered. Designation 09. Bonner smiled grimly. All right, 09. Let's show them what happens when humans get angry. The Omega soldier raised his rifle. Affirmative. The first Vashtar appeared through the smoke. Bonner raised his weapon. His finger tightened on the trigger. Let's finish this. The sound of distant explosions rumbled through the night as Bonner and the Omega squad moved toward the front lines. Smoke and ash hung heavy in the air, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. Fires burned across the city, casting flickering shadows against the crumbling walls. The distant sound of plasma fire mixed with the terrified screams of civilians and the guttural roars of the Vashtar. Bonner's heart was hammering against his chest, but his hands were steady on his rifle. Years of combat training had taught him to push the fear aside and focus on the mission. Beside him, 09 marched silently, his crimson visor glowing faintly in the darkness. The rest of the Omega squad moved in formation behind them, rifles raised, sensors scanning for movement. Their footfalls were unnervingly quiet despite the heavy armor. Bonner had seen elite units before, but nothing like this. The precision, the coordination, it was almost unnatural. He couldn't tell if they were more human or machine. A distant growl echoed through the smoke. Bonner's grip tightened on his rifle. He signaled for the squad to hold position. The ground trembled beneath their feet as something massive approached. A dark shape materialized through the smoke. 10 feet tall, heavily armored, and moving on 4 clawed limbs. Hunter-class Vashtar. 09's voice was cold and even. High-density plating. Energy resistance. Bonner raised his rifle. Weakness. Base of the neck, 09 replied. The creature's crimson eyes locked onto them, and it charged. The ground shook as it tore through the debris, metal claws leaving deep gouges in the street. Bonner fired, his plasma rounds striking the creature's chest and shoulders. The shots barely scratched the thick armor. The Omega squad responded instantly. 3 soldiers opened fire, blue plasma streaking through the air. The hunter snarled and leaped toward them. It swiped its massive claw toward Bonner. He rolled to the side, feeling the rush of air as the claw barely missed his face. He hit the ground hard and scrambled to his knees. 09 was already moving. He leaped toward the hunter with inhuman speed, landing on its back. His armored hand clamped around the creature's thick neck. The hunter bucked violently, trying to throw him off. 09's other hand extended, revealing a glowing blade. With a single precise strike, he drove the blade into the base of the hunter's skull. The creature let out a strangled growl before collapsing to the ground with a heavy thud. Bonner pushed himself to his feet, breathing hard. That was impressive. 09 stepped off the corpse and turned toward him. Target neutralized. We proceed. Before Bonner could reply, a blinding flash of light erupted from the sky. A massive Vashtar cruiser was descending through the smoke, its hull lined with pulsating blue lights. Heavy cannons extended from its sides, charging with energy. Bonner's heart sank. Artillery-class cruiser, 09 said. Targeting solution detected. The cruiser's cannons glowed brighter. Move, Bonner shouted. The street exploded in a wave of fire and debris as the first barrage struck. Bonner was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. His helmet cracked against the concrete, and his vision blurred. He struggled to breathe, coughing as dust filled his lungs. Hands grabbed him under the arms, hauling him to his feet. Harris was shouting something, but Bonner couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. His head was spinning. "Colonel," Harris's voice finally cut through the noise. "They're advancing." Bonner shook his head and forced his vision to clear. Through the smoke, he saw dark figures moving toward them. Dozens of Vashtar warriors, heavily armored and carrying plasma rifles. The Omega squad formed a line in front of Bonner, weapons raised. "Hold the line," Bonner shouted. The Vashtar opened fire. Plasma bolts ripped through the air. The Omega squad's shields flickered as they absorbed the hits. Then the Omega soldiers fired back. Their plasma rounds were faster, more precise. 3 Vashtar fell instantly, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Bonner took cover behind a chunk of fallen concrete and fired at the nearest Vashtar. His shot caught the alien in the throat, and it collapsed in a spray of dark fluid. Another warrior charged toward him, raising a jagged plasma blade. Bonner ducked beneath the strike and drove his rifle's barrel into the alien's chest, pulling the trigger. The creature shuddered and fell. A deafening roar shook the street. Bonner looked up to see the cruiser's cannons charging again. "We can't hold this position," Harris shouted. Bonner's mind raced. He turned toward 09. "Can you take down that ship?" 09's visor flickered. "Affirmative." "How?" 09 raised his hand. His gauntlet opened, revealing a glowing red sphere embedded in his palm. "Detonation core. Manual insertion required." Bonner's eyes widened. "You'll have to board the ship." "Yes. It's suicide." 09 turned toward the cruiser. The ship's cannons were glowing dangerously bright. "We are designed for this." "Wait." Bonner grabbed his arm. "Let me go with you." 09's visor pulsed. "Negative." 09 turned and sprinted toward the cruiser. His black armor blurred as his cybernetic enhancements propelled him forward. The cruiser's side cannons opened fire. 09 dodged the blasts with inhuman reflexes, leaping onto a crumbling building and launching himself toward the ship. He landed on the hull with a metallic thud. The Vashtar warriors on the ship turned toward him. 09 raised his rifle and opened fire. He moved like a ghost, weaving between enemy shots and cutting down any Vashtar that got close. Plasma bolts sparked against his armor as he forced his way toward the ship's core. "Come on," Bonner growled. He raised his rifle and fired at the Vashtar forces advancing on the ship, trying to give 09 cover. Harris and the Omega squad followed suit, laying down suppressing fire. 09 reached the core access panel. He planted his palm against it. The red glow from his hand intensified. Alarms blared across the ship as the core destabilized. "Core breach detected," 09's voice echoed through the comms. Bonner's eyes widened. "Get out of there." "Negative." Bonner's stomach tightened. 09. 09's visor flickered. Mission success. The cruiser erupted in a blinding explosion. Bonner raised his arm to shield his eyes as a shockwave blasted through the street. The Vashtar forces scattered. The burning remains of the cruiser crashed into the city with a deafening boom. Bonner's heart was pounding. He scanned the wreckage for any sign of 09. He started toward the burning remains of the ship, ignoring Harris's shouts behind him. He stumbled over a chunk of metal and fell to his knees beside the wreckage. Through the smoke, he saw a dark figure moving. 09 stepped through the flames, his armor scorched and smoking. His visor flickered weakly as he approached Bonner. "Mission complete," 09 said. His voice was distorted, damaged. Bonner exhaled shakily. He reached out and clasped 09's arm. "You crazy bastard." 09's visor dimmed. "Orders." Bonner smiled grimly. "We push forward." 09's visor glowed faintly. "Acknowledged." Bonner stood and raised his rifle. The Vashtar forces were regrouping in the distance. The Omega squad moved into formation beside him. Bonner's grip tightened on his rifle. His pulse quickened. "All right," Bonner said. "Let's show them what happens when humans get angry." The ground was still smoldering from the wreckage of the Vashtar cruiser. The fires crackled in the night, casting long shadows across the shattered cityscape. Bonner stood in the middle of the destruction, his rifle lowered but his eyes sharp. The Omega squad was regrouping behind him, reloading weapons and tending to minor injuries. 09 stood nearby, his armor scorched and his visor flickering weakly, but he remained upright. The crimson glow of his eyes cut through the darkness like faint embers. "Colonel," Harris's voice broke through the static of the comms. "We've got movement." Bonner's gaze narrowed. His eyes scanned the horizon, where the smoke was starting to thin. Beyond the wreckage of the cruiser, the city stretched toward the edge of a massive canyon. The Vashtar hadn't retreated. They were regrouping. A low rumble echoed through the ground. Bonner's stomach tightened. He recognized that sound. Heavy assault walkers. The Vashtar were bringing in heavy reinforcements. Bonner raised his rifle and switched to thermal view. Bright red shapes were moving toward them, large and heavily armored. "Shit," Bonner muttered. "We need to move." "Agreed," 09 said, stepping forward. His visor pulsed faintly. "Tactical analysis. Enemy numbers are increasing exponentially." "How many?" 3 battalions. Estimated 2,000 units. 8 heavy walkers." Bonner's heart sank. They didn't have the firepower to hold this position, not against that. But there was no way they could outrun them either. "We'll be overrun," Harris said. Bonner's mind raced. He tapped into his comm. "Command, this is Colonel Bonner, requesting immediate orbital strike on Grid Sector 27. Heavy reinforcements inbound." The comm crackled. A cold female voice responded. "Request denied. Fleet resources are stretched thin. You're on your own." Bonner cursed. He turned toward 09. "Options." 09's visor flickered. 1. Bonner sighed. "Let me guess. Suicide mission." 09's gaze locked onto him. "High probability of casualties. But a tactical counteroffensive is possible." Bonner tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let's hear it." "Divide and eliminate," 09 said. "The heavy walkers are shielded but vulnerable to concentrated fire at the joints. If we engage them separately, they can be disabled." "Divide them how?" Bonner asked. 09's visor brightened. "Bait." Bonner exhaled sharply. "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "Humans have survived worse," 09 said. Bonner looked toward the smoke, where the faint silhouettes of the Vashtar were advancing. His heart hammered in his chest. He knew what this would mean. "All right," Bonner said. "We hit them hard. We draw them in, split them up, and take them down one by one." Harris's eyes widened. "Colonel, that's our only option," Bonner cut him off. He lifted his rifle. "Ready up." The squad moved into formation. Bonner took the front, with 09 at his side. The sound of the advancing Vashtar battalions grew louder. The heavy footsteps of the walkers sent vibrations through the street. Bright red lights appeared in the smoke, the targeting sensors of the walkers locking onto them. A guttural roar erupted from the darkness. The first wave of Vashtar soldiers emerged, heavily armored and wielding energy rifles. They opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts streaked through the air. Open fire, Bonner shouted. The Omega Squad responded with deadly precision. Plasma fire ripped through the air. Bonner fired 3 quick shots, dropping 2 Vashtar warriors. Harris threw a flash grenade into the advancing line. It exploded in a blinding pulse of white light. The Vashtar staggered, disoriented. 09 surged forward, his armored figure moving with unnatural speed. He raised his arm, and his gauntlet emitted a concentrated plasma beam. The beam cut through the Vashtar ranks, slicing through armor and flesh alike. The first of the heavy walkers stepped through the smoke. It was massive, easily 3 stories tall, with thick black plating and glowing red visors where its eyes should have been. Its arm-mounted cannons glowed with lethal energy. "Shit," Bonner breathed. The walker raised its cannon. "Cover," Bonner shouted. A burst of plasma fire tore through the street. The explosion knocked Bonner off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his helmet sparking. His HUD flickered, and blood ran down his forehead. He forced himself to his knees. His ears were ringing. "Status," he growled. "Minimal casualties," 09 replied. His visor was dimming. Walker recharging. Bonner stood. Not for long. He raised his rifle and charged toward the walker. The Omega Squad followed, firing as they advanced. Plasma bolts struck the walker's armored legs, sparking against the thick plating. The walker turned toward them, charging its cannon. Bonner skidded to a stop, raised his rifle, and fired a concentrated burst at the walker's right knee joint. Sparks erupted from the impact. The walker staggered, its balance shifting. 09. Bonner shouted. 09 moved instantly. He leaped onto the walker's leg, scaling it with mechanical precision. He drove his plasma blade into the exposed joint. The walker roared, and its systems flickered. "Structural damage confirmed," 09 said. "Initiating final strike." 09's hand extended, revealing the red detonation core. He jammed it into the walker's exposed joint and activated it. "Detonation in 3 seconds," 09 said. "Get clear," Bonner shouted. 09 leaped from the walker. The core erupted in a flash of red light. The walker collapsed, its legs crumpling beneath it as the explosion tore through its systems. It crashed to the ground in a cloud of smoke and fire. Bonner coughed as he stumbled back to his feet. The other 7 walkers were still advancing. His heart sank. They couldn't do this 7 more times. Suddenly, a high-pitched sound echoed through the air. A streak of blue light shot down from the sky. The lead walker's head exploded in a shower of metal and plasma. Bonner's eyes widened. He turned toward the sky. A sleek, black Terran warship broke through the clouds. "Colonel Bonner," a deep voice echoed through his comm. "This is Admiral Reyes. We've got your back." Another wave of blue energy erupted from the warship's cannons. The second walker exploded. The Vashtar battalions faltered. Bonner's pulse quickened. "Omega Squad, push forward." They advanced through the smoke. Bonner fired at the nearest Vashtar soldier, dropping him with a clean headshot. Harris moved beside him, covering his flank. 09 charged ahead, cutting through the remaining Vashtar with brutal efficiency. The Terran warship fired again. The third walker exploded in a brilliant flash. The remaining Vashtar started to retreat. Bonner breathed heavily as the last Vashtar fell. Smoke and blood filled the air. His armor was scorched, his body bruised and battered, but they had won. 09 stepped beside him, his armor damaged and his visor flickering weakly. "Status?" Bonner asked. "Victory," 09 replied. Bonner smiled faintly. Not bad for a suicide mission. 09's visor glowed softly. Humans. Adapt. Bonner's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the last traces of the Vashtar fleet were disappearing into the sky. He exhaled sharply. The war wasn't over, but tonight, humanity had proven it wouldn't go down without a fight. Bonner stood at the edge of the ruined battlefield, his boots crunching over the debris of broken Vashtar armor and shattered plasma casings. Smoke still drifted through the cold night air, mixing with the scent of burnt metal and blood. His rifle rested in his hands, still hot from the last firefight. His breath came in shallow, ragged pulls as he scanned the remains of the enemy force. The ground was littered with the bodies of Vashtar soldiers and the smoking wreckage of their war machines. Behind him, Omega Squad was tending to the wounded and gathering supplies from the fallen. 09 stood beside him, his armored frame battered and scorched. His visor flickered weakly, the red glow dim but steady. The synthetic soldier's posture was straight, his head turning slowly as he scanned the perimeter. "Status report," Bonner said. 09's visor brightened slightly. "Enemy forces in this sector. Neutralized. Current casualties within Omega Squad. 5 confirmed dead, 3 critical." Bonner's jaw tightened. He already knew who they had lost. Morrison, Vance, Reiner, and 2 others. Good men. Good soldiers. Gone. His hands curled into fists. "Evac window. 18 minutes, 09 replied. Bonner's eyes narrowed. That wasn't enough time. The Vashtar would regroup. They always did. And when they returned, they would bring overwhelming firepower. This victory was temporary, and he knew it. A crackle of static filled his earpiece. "Colonel Bonner, this is Admiral Reyes. Are you still operational?" Bonner touched the side of his helmet. "Still breathing, Admiral." Reyes's voice was calm and steady. "The Vashtar fleet is repositioning in orbit. Long-range scans indicate that they're preparing a counter-offensive. We've intercepted encrypted transmissions suggesting they've called in reinforcements." Bonner's eyes darkened. "How many?" 10 cruisers, 3 dreadnoughts, Reyes said. "They're not leaving survivors this time." Bonner swore under his breath. That much firepower would reduce the entire colony to dust within minutes. They had to stop them before they got into firing position. Reyes's tone hardened. "Colonel, I've been authorized to pull back the fleet. The Council believes the colony is lost." Bonner's fist clenched. "What?" "The risk is too high," Reyes continued. "The colony is already compromised. We can't afford to lose the flagship." "There's civilians down here," Bonner snapped. "You're just going to let them burn." Reyes's tone was measured but cold. "Our orders are clear." Bonner's chest tightened. He could feel the rage rising inside him. His pulse quickened, and his grip on his rifle tightened. He looked at the faces of his squad, bloodied, exhausted, but still standing. He thought about the colony, men, women, and children, who had no chance against the Vashtar. And the Council was ready to abandon them. Bonner's voice dropped into a low growl. "You tell the Council that if they run, they'd better not expect me to follow." There was a long silence. Then Reyes sighed. "Understood." The channel went dead. Bonner turned toward 09. "How long until the dreadnoughts are in range?" 17 minutes, 09 replied. "Colonel, there is a way to stop them." Bonner's eyes sharpened. "Go on." "The dreadnoughts are shielded from direct attacks," 09 said. "But if we disable the targeting arrays on the lead cruiser, their formation will collapse." "Targeting arrays are on the hull," Bonner said. "We'd have to get close." "Affirmative," 09 said. "A small strike team could infiltrate through the ventilation shaft beneath the cruiser's thruster assembly." "That's a suicide mission," Harris said, stepping forward. His face was streaked with blood and soot. "There's no way out of that ship once we're inside." Bonner's jaw tightened. He already knew that. "We don't need to survive," Bonner said quietly. "We just need to succeed." Harris's expression darkened, but he didn't argue. "I'll go," 09 said. Bonner shook his head. "No. I need you down here. If we fail, you're the last line of defense." 09's visor dimmed. "Human life preservation is my priority." "Yeah, well, sometimes that means knowing when to let us go," Bonner said. He turned toward the squad. Harris. Voss. You're with me. We move in 5 minutes. Harris's face was pale, but he nodded. Voss clenched her fists and stepped forward without hesitation. They moved quickly through the ruins, crossing into the old industrial district, where the ventilation shafts were still partially intact. The broken steel beams and collapsed walkways created natural cover, but it wouldn't hold up under direct fire. Bonner's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the last traces of the Vashtar fleet were disappearing into the sky. He exhaled sharply. The war wasn't over, but tonight, humanity had proven it wouldn't go down without a fight. Bonner stood at the edge of the ruined battlefield, his boots crunching over the debris of broken Vashtar armor and shattered plasma casings. Smoke still drifted through the cold night air, mixing with the scent of burnt metal and blood. His rifle rested in his hands, still hot from the last firefight. His breath came in shallow, ragged pulls as he scanned the remains of the enemy force. The ground was littered with the bodies of Vashtar soldiers and the smoking wreckage of their war machines. Behind him, Omega Squad was tending to the wounded and gathering supplies from the fallen. 09 stood beside him, his armored frame battered and scorched. His visor flickered weakly, the red glow dim but steady. The synthetic soldier's posture was straight, his head turning slowly as he scanned the perimeter. "Status report," Bonner said. 09's visor brightened slightly. "Enemy forces in this sector. Neutralized. Current casualties within Omega Squad. 5 confirmed dead, 3 critical." Bonner's jaw tightened. He already knew who they had lost. Morrison, Vance, Reiner, and 2 others. Good men. Good soldiers. Gone. His hands curled into fists. "Evac window." 18 minutes, 09 replied. Bonner's eyes narrowed. That wasn't enough time. The Vashtar would regroup. They always did. And when they returned, they would bring overwhelming firepower. This victory was temporary, and he knew it. A crackle of static filled his earpiece. "Colonel Bonner, this is Admiral Reyes. Are you still operational?" Bonner touched the side of his helmet. "Still breathing, Admiral." Reyes's voice was calm and steady. "The Vashtar fleet is repositioning in orbit. Long-range scans indicate that they're preparing a counteroffensive. We intercepted encrypted transmissions suggesting they've called in reinforcements." Bonner's eyes darkened. "How many?" 10 cruisers. 3 dreadnoughts, Rice said. "They're not leaving survivors this time." Bonner swore under his breath. That much firepower would reduce the entire colony to dust within minutes. They had to stop them before they got into firing position. Reyes's tone hardened. "Colonel, I've been authorized to pull back the fleet. The Council believes the colony is lost." Bonner's fist clenched. "What?" "The risk is too high," Rice continued. "The colony is already compromised. We can't afford to lose the flagship." "There's civilians down here," Bonner snapped. "You're just going to let them burn." Reyes's tone was measured but cold. "Our orders are clear." Bonner's chest tightened. He could feel the rage rising inside him. His pulse quickened, and his grip on his rifle tightened. He looked at the faces of his squad, bloodied, exhausted, but still standing. He thought about the colony, men, women, and children, who had no chance against the Vashtar. And the Council was ready to abandon them. Bonner's voice dropped into a low growl. "You tell the Council that if they run, they'd better not expect me to follow." There was a long silence. Then Reyes sighed. "Understood." The channel went dead. Bonner turned toward 09. "How long until the dreadnoughts are in range?" 17 minutes, 09 replied. "Colonel, there is a way to stop them." Bonner's eyes sharpened. "Go on." "The dreadnoughts are shielded from direct attacks," 09 said. "But if we disable the targeting arrays on the lead cruiser, their formation will collapse." "Targeting arrays are on the hull," Bonner said. "We'd have to get close." "Affirmative," 09 said. A small strike team could infiltrate through the ventilation shaft beneath the cruiser's thruster assembly. "That's a suicide mission," Harris said, stepping forward. His face was streaked with blood and soot. "There's no way out of that ship once we're inside." Bonner's jaw tightened. He already knew that. "We don't need to survive," Bonner said quietly. "We just need to succeed." Harris' expression darkened, but he didn't argue. "I'll go," 09 said. Bonner shook his head. "No. I need you down here. If we fail, you're the last line of defense." 09's visor dimmed. "Human life preservation is my priority." "Yeah, well, sometimes that means knowing when to let us go," Bonner said. He turned toward the squad. "Harris, Voss, you're with me. We move in 5 minutes." Harris's face was pale, but he nodded. Voss clenched her fists and stepped forward without hesitation. They moved quickly through the ruins, crossing into the old industrial district, where the ventilation shafts were still partially intact. The broken steel beams and collapsed walkways created natural cover, but it wouldn't hold up under direct fire. Harris laughed bitterly. "We'll never get through their shields." Bonner turned toward 09. "Can you cloak us?" "Limited capacity," 09 said. "I can mask energy signatures long enough to infiltrate." "Good enough," Bonner said. He turned toward the squad's remaining soldiers, a handful of battered and bloodied fighters standing amid the ruins. "Listen up. This is a one-way trip. We take out the dreadnought, or this colony burns. If you're not ready to die, stand down now." No one moved. Bonner's jaw tightened. "All right then." 09 activated his cloaking field. A thin shimmer of energy washed over Bonner and Harris. The remaining soldiers fell into formation, moving quickly toward the extraction zone where a damaged human gunship sat smoldering on the ground. Its engines were partially wrecked, but the weapons were still operational. Bonner climbed into the pilot's seat. Harris dropped into the co-pilot's chair, wincing as he strapped himself in. "You know how to fly this thing?" Harris asked. "Guess we'll find out," Bonner muttered. The ship lifted off with a shudder, its thrusters sputtering as Bonner pushed the throttle to maximum. The Vashtar dreadnought loomed ahead, a dark metallic mountain against the stars. Its surface pulsed with crimson light as the primary cannon charged. "Entry vector locked," 09 said, approaching the forward ventral docking port. Bonner's fingers tightened on the controls. The ship shot toward the dreadnought, its damaged hull rattling under the strain. Vashtar defense turrets opened fire, bright blue bolts of plasma streaking past them. Bonner twisted the controls, weaving through the fire. 10 seconds, 09 said. A plasma bolt struck the ship's starboard wing. Warning lights flared across the console. "We're not going to make it," Harris shouted. "Yes, we are," Bonner said through gritted teeth. He pulled the ship into a hard spiral, cutting power to the engines. The gunship dropped toward the dreadnought's hull, skimming dangerously close to the surface. Bonner fired the docking clamps. The ship struck the hull with a bone-jarring impact, the clamps locking into place. "Breach complete," 09 said. Bonner grabbed his rifle and kicked open the airlock. He leaped into the dark corridor beyond. Harris and the others followed. 09 led the way through the tight passageways of the dreadnought's underbelly. The ship's internal defenses activated, and Vashtar guards emerged from hidden alcoves. Plasma rifles raised. Bonner opened fire, cutting down the first two before they could react. Harris followed up with a grenade that tore through the narrow corridor. They advanced quickly, moving through the labyrinthine corridors toward the central power core. The sound of klaxons echoed through the ship as more guards poured into the hallways. Bonner fired relentlessly, his rifle kicking in his hands. Harris shouted as a plasma bolt tore through his shoulder. Bonner caught him before he hit the ground. "Keep moving," Bonner shouted. They reached the core chamber. The massive cylindrical power reactor hummed with energy, bright crimson light pulsing from its center. A control console stood beneath it, guarded by 3 elite Vashtar warriors clad in heavy black armor. Bonner tossed his last grenade into the chamber. It exploded with a sharp concussion, knocking the guards off balance. He fired into the smoke, taking down one of them. Harris dragged himself to the console, blood streaming down his arm. "I've got it. Set the overload," Bonner shouted. The remaining Vashtar guards charged. Bonner rushed forward, tackling the nearest one. The alien was stronger, slamming Bonner into the ground with bone-crushing force. Bonner grunted, rolled, and drove his combat knife into the creature's throat. "Overload in 40 seconds," Harris shouted. Bonner staggered to his feet. The last Vashtar guard rushed him, only to be torn apart by 09's plasma blade. The ship trembled violently as the core's energy surged out of control. "Time to go," Bonner shouted. They ran back toward the docking port. Harris stumbled. Bonner grabbed his arm and pulled him along. The corridor behind them erupted in flames as the power core destabilized. They'd reached the docking clamps. Bonner hit the release button. The ship detached with a metallic screech. Bonner pulled Harris into the cockpit as the ship's engines ignited. 09 took the controls. The dreadnought exploded behind them in a blinding flash of white and red light. The shockwave struck their ship, sending it tumbling through the atmosphere. Bonner gripped Harris's arm as the ship spun out of control. 09 stabilized the craft, bringing it level. Bonner looked out the viewport. The burning wreckage of the dreadnought was falling toward the planet's surface. The remaining Vashtar fleet was breaking apart, retreating. "They're running," Harris breathed. Bonner leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly. His hands trembled. His whole body ached, but the colony was still standing. The comm crackled. Ryaz's voice returned. "Colonel, mission accomplished." Bonner's lips curled into a tired smile. "Yeah," he said. "Mission accomplished." Bonner closed his eyes as the ship soared into the sky. Below, the colony stood beneath a sky cleared of enemy ships. For the first time in years, the humans had made the predators bleed. And the universe had learned a hard truth. When humans get angry, the universe trembles.